G'day legends, we're back with episode 13 of our user requested backwards compatibility. This episode actually showcases a lot of solid differences between platforms, whether it's sharper visuals, more consistent frame rates, or games that finally feel like they've reached their full potential on the Switch too. There's a lot to dig into. Some games finally feel like they've been properly unleashed, while others still have room to grow. Aero FS Flight Sim. The closest we'll get to a true flight simulator on Switch, Aero FS is a technical marvel in terms of aircraft detail and realism. However, its world rendering, especially the scenery and terrain, feel like a step back. On the Switch One, the performance sat around a solid 30 FPS mark, with only minor fluctuations during some flights when changing the camera or looking around. Scenery was often quite muddy, especially in handheld mode. While the cockpit visuals were impressive, the flat terrain and low-res buildings broke the immersion. Still, it was a surprisingly competent simulator for the platform. On the Switch 2, not much has changed scenery-wise, but the frame rate is now uncapped and often pushing the 60 FPS. There's still a couple of occasional dips, but nothing that's noticeable to the human eye during actual gameplay. It's a much smoother experience overall, and it really helps with the immersion. Besiege. A creative, physics-driven building game that thrives on chaos, Besiege lets you construct wild machines and watch them either dominate or explode in spectacular fashion. On the Switch One, the game generally hovered around the 45 FPS, but more complex builds or chain reactions could cause that performance to dip and stutter. Terrain and shadows could look rough at times, and frequent physics slowdowns made late-game puzzles a bit harder to enjoy. On the Switch 2, it's unlocked and holds much closer to the 60 FPS mark. There are still some minor dips when things get really out of control, but it's not really noticeable because it stays above 50, and it's a huge step up and a great way to experience the game. Dragonball Fighter Z. Even if you're not deep into Dragon Ball lore like myself, Fighter Z is a fast, fluid, and satisfying fighting game. It's one of the more better technical fighting games on the platform. On the Switch One, it delivered a mostly solid 50 to 60 FPS experience. Cutscenes and transitions could dip slightly, but the fights held up well. On the Switch 2, it maintains a near perfect 60 FPS across the board. It's ultra smooth and an excellent way to jump in or revisit the game. Europa. A stylish, atmospheric, and deeply calming, Europa has been turning heads since its reveal, and it's all about exploration and a sense of wonder. Now, I only had access to the demo version and it was locked at 30 FPS with no major issues on the Switch One. Performance seemed solid for what I saw, though visual detail was a bit muddy and distant objects popped in later. Reports suggest that the full version struggles a bit more. On the Switch 2, it's pretty much the same experience. It's locked to 30 FPS and feels smooth. Based on previous performance of similar titles, I could probably suggest that it would hold around the 30 FPS mark with no slowdown, but because I only had access with the demo, I can't give you a 100% update on this one, but I'm pretty confident it'll stay around that 30. Firewatch. Firewatch was a powerful narrative experience set in the Wyoming wilderness. It's known for its storytelling, atmosphere, and emotional resonance as you struggle to deal with grief. On the Switch One, it was visually impressive, but it was plagued by long pauses and freezing, sometimes up to 10 seconds, plus occasional crashes. You can actually see in the footage here, at one stage it froze for about 10 seconds on the spot, while the audio still played. Texture detail could be inconsistent, and frame pacing issues were noticeable when exploring larger areas. On the Switch 2, all those issues are resolved. The game maintains a stable frame rate, loads smoothly, and runs without issues. If you haven't played Firewatch, on Switch 2, it's the absolute best way to do it. GTA Vice City. Vice City's recent performance patch has breathed new life into the game that has been a bit rough around the edges since launch. On the Switch One, it generally held around 30 FPS, but it would dip during busy traffic or intense shootouts. There was slight texture popping and blur, inconsistent lighting, and it often marred the experience. Performance was better post-patch, but still far from ideal. On the Switch 2, it's now locked at 30 FPS consistently. The overall experience feels cleaner and more smoother, and it makes it an easier way to enjoy the neon-soaked nostalgia. Luigi's Mansion 3. One of Nintendo's most atmospheric and inventive games, beautiful level design and tight gameplay, and a charming sense of character and humour. I absolutely love Luigi's Mansion. On the Switch 1 it was already really well optimised, sticking close to 30 FPS with very minor stutters here and there. Handheld mode did introduce some slight softness, and certain busy effects could cause momentary slowdowns. On the Switch 2 it maintains a locked 30 FPS with no hitches during testing. It might not be a drastic leap forward, but it's as good as you want it to be. Monster Jam Showdown. This offbeat racer mixes arcade mayhem with monster trucks and fun, and it's just over the top and ridiculous, and I quite enjoyed it. On the Switch 1 it's fairly smooth overall, even though the handheld mode suffered from noticeable blur due to dynamic resolution, especially in handheld. Environment detail was toned down to maintain performance, and occasional hitches happened during busy races. On the Switch 2 it's locked at 30 FPS with sharper visuals in docked and handheld mode. It's a solid improvement that adds clarity to the carnage. Railway Empire 2. One of my favourite management sims, offering deep systems and great long-form play sessions. I could sit on this game for hours. On the Switch 1 though, it is held back by an extremely low resolution and choppy performance. Even simple menus could lag, and zooming into detailed city areas caused frequent frame rate drops. I'm talking 15 frames per second. It was playable, but really hard to recommend to people in that state. On the Switch 2 there's a massive upgrade because the frame rate now floats between 30 to 45 FPS. Although the added sharpness really highlights the terrible pixelation of the game, the overall presentation is still far better, load times are shorter, and it finally feels like a version that I can comfortably spend hours in, especially with the new DLCs available. And that's it. Thanks again for all your ongoing support and amazing suggestions. Whether it's a hidden gem or a blockbuster classic, your input continues to help shape this series. Let me know what you want to see tested next. Now, I did tease that this episode was meant to be something a little bit different, but I've had a few technical issues, so hopefully the next video will be what I had planned, but if not, we might just stick to normal programming. Unfortunately, my computer struggles with the memory, so it takes roughly an hour per title to render the FPS testing, so we'll see what we can do. Thanks for watching. Thanks so much for watching my video. If you liked it, the best way you can support What's It Like is by liking, subscribing, and sharing it with your friends. For more reviews, click on the thumbnails to the right, and for everything Nintendo, check out whatsitlike.com.au.